Welcome back to With the First Pick. On this edition of The Perfect Fix, we are fixing the New York Football Giants. So it's easy to forget that 5-season stretch from 2007 to 2011 when the Giants won 2 Super Bowls, both times beating the Brady-Belichick Patriots in the 14 seasons since. Just 2 playoff appearances, 11 losing seasons, and 7 different head coaches. How can the Giants get out of this tailspin? Perpetual losing football? We're here to help. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Rand Carthon. Rand, let's get to it. So, as we do this perfect fix, the Giants are currently 2-11 heading into week 15, and they have started 2-11 or worse in consecutive seasons for the first time in franchise history. The last time they made the playoffs, 2022, Brian Daboll's first year as head coach. In the 3 seasons since, they have combined for 11 wins. By the way, if you're a Giants fan and watching this, let us know what you think the biggest needs are in the comments and what you want this team to do this offseason to be a legit playoff contender. All right. As we sit here heading into week 15, they got the number 1 overall pick, Rand, in the 2026 NFL draft. We'll see how that plays out. There'll be some players up for free agency. And let's start there. Some players that are going to be free agents. Names like Russ Wilson, Jermaine Eluminor, the left tackle, the right tackle, Evan Neal, the former first-round pick, a couple of interior offensive linemen, Wan'Dale Robinson. So let's start there. What are we going to do in terms of free agency?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind bringing Jermaine back at right tackle. I think he's played solid this year. So I would look to see what that number is going to be, as well as Wan'Dale Robinson. You talk about draft, developing, re-signing your own. I think he fits that mold. Now, again, we got to see what the price is for his style of receiver. But those would be 2 guys off the top that I would for sure want to re-sign.
And that makes sense because Wan'Dale has come into his own with Malik Neighbors being out with the injury. Eluminor has not been bad, and they had some issues along the interior offensive line. We'll talk about what that looks like in terms of draft needs, addressing the interior offensive line, and some other needs along the way. The other thing, the elephant in the room, as it were, Brian Daboll got fired midway through the season. Joe Schoen, the GM, is still there. They both came in together in 2022. Joe Schoen's track record maybe is been portrayed worse than it actually is. But the reality is he's been good at finding low-cost depth and extensions to some players that have made sense. But he's also been pretty bad at identifying sort of these mid-tier free agents, especially along the offensive line and at wide receiver. So some guys that he signed that made sense, Bobby Okereke, the linebacker, he's been really good. The extensions for Andrew Thomason and Sexy Dexy. Darius Slayton, Paulson Adebo, and then, the John Feliciano, Mark Lewinsky signings, Shane Lemieux signings, all did not work out. Paris Campbell, the wide receiver, didn't work out as well. And I know Giants fans are frustrated. So first order of business, what are we doing with Joe Schoen, GM? Because the issue becomes if you fire the coach, keep the GM that you brought in together, and then allow the GM to hire the next coach, it feels like you're just kicking the can forward and more half measures than just taking a clean cut.
No, and I understand that thought and that logic. And looking through Joe Schoen's draft classes that he's had 4 draft classes. This would be his 5th upcoming draft class. He's drafted 13 starters in his 4 draft classes.
Yep.
With, and I didn't count Deonte Banks as a starter because he's currently not starting. However, I did count Abdul Carter as a starter because essentially he is with the amount that he plays. Even though Deonte Banks plays a lot, he's drafted some guys that have all, that have played well for him. Now, this is just a crapshoot of the draft. Sometimes you're going to have better drafts than others. That kind of is what it is. If you look at the 2024 draft class, their top 4 picks are all starters for him. Malik Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, Andrew Phillips, Theo Johnson. And then the next pick in that draft class was Tyrone Tracy, who had a great rookie year and was getting off to a pretty decent start to start this season. Then he got hurt, and then we saw the emergence of Cam Scatterbo, so it wasn't a much of a need there. But even saying that, you took Cam Scatterbo in the 4th round, you feel like you got your starting running back. The year before, you took Tyrone Tracy in the 5th round, and you felt like you had a starting running back. So they found values. You have Cordell Flott from the 2022 draft class, a 3rd-round pick. That's a starter. Dane Belton, he was a 4th-round pick. Michael McFadden was a 5th-round pick. Like I mentioned, Theo Johnson was a 4th-round pick. So he's found value in terms of the draft. And that's been Joe Schoen's calling card throughout his career. He has been a college scout, an area scout. And so that was his, that's how he made his hay in this league. And so some of those free agent signings, I don't believe the Paris Campbell deal was that big of a contract, so to speak. If I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but that sometimes you're just going to have that in free agency, and not every single free agent pick that, whether it's good or bad, comes down to the front office. Sometimes it's who the coaching staff really want because they've had him somewhere before, or they really value this guy. And sometimes that happens where you sign a guy that maybe the front office doesn't love as much as the coaching staff does.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think Giants fans, and I understand the frustration because there's no excuse for this team to have played as poorly as they have over the last 10 seasons, post Eli Manning and those Super Bowl runs. But when you look at the Joe Schoen / Brian Dable drafts, they've actually been pretty good. And I know in the moment we certainly liked the 2025 draft when we did the immediate draft grades, and even going back to 2022. I think the issue when fans get frustrated is some of the free agent signings that haven't worked out and the offensive line just being in disarray. But like I said to you last night, we were talking about this. Kayvon Thibodeau at number 5 and then Evan Neal at number 7 back in 2022. No one at the time thought that was a bad idea. It made a ton of sense because Kayvon Thibodeau was one of the best edge rushers, and Evan Neal showed no signs of being the player he has become because of injury or otherwise once he got to New York. He was as solid as they come coming out of Alabama. You mentioned the head coach. All right, let's talk about it. Another player that they got right, Jackson Dart. Traded up to 25, got him in the 2025 draft. He's been better than advertised. He's got to find ways to stay healthy, but you got to get the coach right if you are, in fact, sticking with the GM. So let's start there. Are you sticking with Joe Schoen? Is that in the best interest of this team?
Yeah, I think it's probably in the best interest of the organization right now. Again, just to have some solidarity there. And if you go back and you just look at the history of the New York Giants, especially when they were good, they had strong head coaches and they had the GM that could facilitate, right? And so it didn't need for it to be just the GM show. If you go back to Jerry Reese, he had Tom Coughlin. We know how strong Tom Coughlin is and how much of a presence he had in the building, just in terms of creating and establishing the culture, but also just in terms of player acquisition. You go all the way back to Bill Parcells under George Young. George Young was the consummate CEO type GM, as was Jerry Reese, who also just had a strong track record in scouting. But then you had a Bill Parcells, who was who Tom Coughlin got his way from, having come up under Bill Parcells. So I think you need to get back to some of that. Let Joe Schoen be the CEO and be the facilitator, and then find that strong head coach.
All right, let's go then. You got to give me some names of coaches, because if you get the Ben Johnson coach right, if you get the Mike Vrabel coach right, the young quarterback will follow, and you can see immediate results. So what are we going to do? Who are some names as we look at Brian Daboll here, who no longer gets to wear Giants gear for free? Who are we going to hire to help out Jackson Dart get to where he needs to get to?
Well, I'm just going to throw some names out there, and I think, again, it's worth the conversation, and we'll see these names. And when I did this, it wasn't from the standpoint of let me go and pull a list of 55 guys who we think. I'm giving you names who I truly believe will be in the interview cycle and that will have interviews, and not just hot names of, young coordinators, because some of these young coordinators haven't been coordinators long enough, haven't been around winning programs long enough to understand how to do it. So in no particular order, Rams defensive coordinator Chris Shula. I think he would be an interesting name, especially from the nostalgia standpoint. You can tie that Shula name to the Mara family name and how that whole thing works out. I think that would have some. And I think just off the top of my head, I would assume, because Chris has been a defensive coordinator the last couple of years, either he's going to want to stay calling the defense, and we see what that defense looks like at the Rams, and we know the talent that the Giants currently have. But if he were to name a defensive coordinator, he could name a guy like Aubrey Pleasant to be his defensive coordinator, a hot name that in a couple of years we're going to be hearing Aubrey's name either as a defensive coordinator or as a head coach candidate pretty soon. Jeff Hafley will be a hot name out of Green Bay, the defensive coordinator there. We know how that defense is playing and just the level in which he calls this scheme. And by the way, he's been a head coach before at Boston College. So he will come into it with some experience of how to run a program. Another name, Vance Joseph, defensive coordinator out of Denver.
These are all defensive guys. What are Giants?
All defensive guys, but they're going to be tasked with finding those coordinators that can coordinate this offense for this young quarterback. And again, I think too, because you want to accentuate what you do well, and I think the Giants have a good defense in terms of the players and the talent. They just got to have the right scheme to fit those guys. And Vance Joseph has been a head coach before, and whether right or wrong, he didn't have a long shot at being a head coach, and so he was quickly terminated. But he spent the last couple years under Sean Payton, understanding how to run not only a defense but just an organization and a program. So I think Vance Joseph will be a hot name there. Now, my two outside of the box, so to speak, one being not really outside the box, but I think he would definitely be worth their time and considering, is Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman. I think he would be a really good coach for them to talk to. And you and I kind of talked about this last night. He's in position right now where the Giants can interview him now because they don't have a current head coach. And I don't know what his contract situation is with with Notre Dame, but it could potentially be worth them having a conversation with him now. And then my one true outside of the box thinking, when you think about culture, establishing a way, and just when you say this person's name, you have a thought and an image that comes to your head on how to run a program. And if I were the New York Giants, I would consider having a conversation to trade for Mike Tomlin.
You read my mind. I was going to throw Mike T out there because, listen, Steelers fans can be as angry as they want at Mike T, but I always ask this question. What's the over-under, or I'll set the over-under at 10 minutes. How long will Mike Tomlin be unemployed? More or fewer than 10 minutes?
I'm going to go less.
Exactly. So, and it comes back to the other point. When you have guys like Mike Vrabel or Mike Tomlin who are culture setters, you got to worry about the X's and O's. You have someone who sells you on something that you believe in. I think that gets you a long way. I do wonder if the Giants fans will be willing. In fact, let us know in the comments. Let's say the Giants have a top 5 pick when it's all said and done. Would you come off that top 5 pick, send it to Pittsburgh for Mike Tomlin? Because yes, you lose a top 5 pick, but you're going to be guaranteed to win 9 games at least going forward, and then you got your quarterback.
Now, I could tell you this. Myself, I wouldn't give up a top 5 pick.
Okay.
I wouldn't. But again, it's one of those situations that it may not necessarily cost you a first-round pick, because Mike Tomlin is one of the higher paid coaches in the league. And so you're taking on that contract. And we don't know how much time is left on that contract. So you may have to not only trade for him, but extend him like a player.
His contract runs through 2027 is what I understand. And I think the reports is he's making north of 15.
Okay, so north of 15 means you got 2 years left on the deal. Mike Tomlin isn't going to go anywhere where he doesn't have an additional 2 to 3 years on his deal.
Right. He has a no trade clause too, from what I understand.
And so that's going to have to come with an extension. So the Giants fans will essentially be asking, are we willing to give up a second-round pick for Mike Tomlin? Is what it's going to really boil down to. Because and if I'm a Giants fan, or a Giants front office person, I would consider giving up the second-round pick, because I'm sitting here with the first overall pick as it currently stands, understanding that Vegas at 2 could call me, Cleveland at 4, New Orleans at 5, the Jets at 7, and Arizona at 8, all have picks that I could be able to get back that second-round pick that we would give up for Mike Tomlin. Just something to think about. I'm just saying.
Yep. No, that's right. So, let us know in the comments. I'm going to rip through some of these potential free agents they could target and some draft guys, and we'll get it out of here. Jalen Coker, his contract's going to be up. Undrafted out of Holy Cross. He's a really good young player that we don't talk enough about at Carolina. Alec Pierce, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Naylor, those guys' contracts are going to be up at cornerback. If you're looking in the secondary, Lante Taylor, Nashawn Wright, I would imagine the Bears want to get Nashawn under contract, but he's been really good. And at safety, Cam Curl and Reed Blankenship are some other names. Linebacker, Nakobe Dean, Leo Chenal, Ivan Pace. Just thinking about free agencies and trying to get this thing right. The interior offensive line, that's something they got to sort out. Free agent market doesn't look great, but maybe that's what they do in the draft. We talked about Francis Malnoa, Vega Ione, Emmanuel Pregnon could be options there. And if you're picking top 5, Caleb Downs is an option. Carnell Tate's going to be in the conversation of wide receiver, and Arvell Reese when we talk about him to the end of days, it feels like. Let us know in the comments what free agent do you want to target if you're a Giants fan, and who do you want to get in the draft? Whether that's a trade down or whether you just take Arvell Reese if that's your guy at the top of the draft class there. All right, Rand. Last thing before we get out of here. Can this Giants organization, if they get everything right, can they be the 2023 Houston Texans or the 2024 Washington Commanders when they got C.J. Stroud in Houston or Jaden Daniels in Washington and turn things around immediately? So can we say 3 or 4 or 5 months from now that this team has a chance to be a playoff team?
No, I think they can be. I think there's enough talent in key spots. No matter who the head coach is, you're not coming into it saying that we need to find a quarterback or we don't have wide receiver one or we need pass rushers or we need guys to stop the run. Those are typically problems that you come into when you inherit a new program that whomever the next head coach is, he's not having to worry about that. It's just giving this thing more structure and creating and establishing a culture that is the New York Giants way.
Love it. All right. That's it. Perfect fix for the New York Giants. You are welcome, Giants fans. Let us know in the comments if you think this thing is going to work. How long will it take to turn this team around? Are they a playoff team in 2026? And stick around and come back and check it back often because we're doing a perfect fix for every one of these NFL teams as they are disqualified from the playoffs. So we'll see you then.